Yesterday I locked the front door for the last time. The key felt heavier than it should have. Maybe because that house wasn't just wood and drywall, it was 40 years of everything I never said out loud. I stood on the porch watching the for sale sign tilt in the wind. The rain had started early, soft and patient, tapping on the tin roof she picked out. Mary loved that sound. Said it made the world honest again. The young couple was waiting by their car, the kind with cameras and screens for mirrors. They smiled, polite but nervous, holding their umbrellas like they weren't sure what to do with them. I told them I'd just grab one more thing from inside. Truth was, I didn't want to leave yet. Inside, the air still smelled faintly of her coffee, dark roast, black, no sugar. There was a cup by the sink, the chipped blue one she always used. I never could throw it out. Even after all these years, it still felt wrong to wash it clean. The clock on the wall had stopped at 7:42. That was the morning she left for good. Heart attack. Sudden right there at the breakfast table. I found her half-turned, like she was about to say something, but she never did. The floor creaked near the hallway, same spot that always did. For a second, I almost said her name out loud. Old habits don't die. They just wait, in the quiet. I took the watch she'd given me from the counter. Still ticking. Still forgiving. My hand shook when I fastened it. Out the window, the rain had turned steady. The couple was looking at the porch, swing the one. She made me promise to fix every spring. I never missed a year, even after she was gone. Guess I thought she might notice. When I finally stepped outside, the young man said, "Beautiful place, sir. Must have been hard to leave." I nodded. Harder than I thought. As I handed him the key, the radio in my truck came on by itself. A soft hum. Static. Then, a familiar tune. Her song. I froze. The same melody she used to hum when she painted the kitchen walls. I hadn't heard it in years. The rain seemed to pause, listening too. The young woman smiled, said something about fate, about memories living in walls. I just looked back at that blue cup in the window. She was still there in all the small things I never threw away. And for the first time in a long while, I whispered, "Mary, I'm leaving now." But the echo that came back sounded a lot like her voice. That night I didn't go far. Just parked the truck down the road where the maples leaned over the shoulder. The rain hadn't stopped, just softened. Like it was tired too. I sat there, engine off, listening to the ticking of the watch. Each second felt heavier out here. Every sound from the house drifted through the mist, the creak of that porch. Swing the screen door clapping once in the wind. Funny how a man can sell his house but not the quiet that comes with it. It follows you. Like the smell of motor oil on your hands long after you've quit the shop. I pulled out the old thermos she gave me back when we were broke newlyweds. The lid stuck like always, and I laughed under my breath. Her initials were scratched into the bottom, MW, in her looping script. I poured a cup, steam rising slow against the window glass. Rain blurred the headlights. I thought about driving, about just heading anywhere. But the road out of town curved past the cemetery, and I didn't feel like explaining myself tonight. So I sat there and let the rain talk. Sometimes it does more for a man than any preacher ever could. You start remembering things you never meant to. The way she'd hum while hanging laundry. How she'd make 2 cups of coffee every morning, even when I left early. How she'd tap the side of her mug when she was thinking. And then you remember the fights. The slammed doors, the things you said that stuck like rust. But even those memories start to soften when it's just you and the rain. I leaned my head back, eyes on the rearview mirror. Through the fogged glass, I could still see the house. The porch light flickered once, then again. I hadn't left it on. My chest tightened a little. I tried to tell myself it was a short in the wiring. She'd told me to fix that a dozen times. I never did. A truck passed on the main road, headlights sweeping through the mist. When they faded, everything went still again, just the hum of the radio, faint and low. I hadn't turned that on either. A voice, soft, far away, drifted through the static. It wasn't clear, just a tone familiar enough to make my hands tremble. Mary's voice always had that warmth, like she was half smiling when she talked. The sound cut out after a few seconds. Silence fell heavy. Even the rain seemed to pause. I looked at her cup again through the window. The blue one still sitting by the sink. I hadn't imagined it earlier. It was still there, right where I left it. I whispered into the cab, "Maybe she's not ready either." And for a moment I thought I saw a light move in the kitchen. Just a faint glow, like someone walking by with a candle. My watch ticked twice, then stopped. By morning, the rain had thinned to a mist, the kind that clings to your jacket and makes the world smell like wet leaves and rust. I started the truck, but the engine coughed twice before it caught. Guess it didn't want to leave either. I drove past the house, slow one last time. The porch light was off now. No sign of that flicker from the night before. But the blue cup was gone from the window. I blinked, leaned forward a little. Maybe the new folks had cleaned up already. Still, it felt strange how something so small could unsettle me more than the whole move. At the gas station by Route 38, Old Man Keller waved me down. He still ran that place, even though his knees had given up years ago. Said he'd heard I sold the place. About time. He laughed, though not unkindly. "Mary would have told you to start living again." I nodded but didn't answer right away. Words like that sit heavy when you're not sure what living means anymore. Inside, the coffee was burnt and bitter, exactly how I remembered it. Keller talked about the new couple, how they seemed city smart, but kind enough. I just listened. The hum of the soda fridge filled the pauses between us. Then he asked, "You leave her things behind?" I shook my head. "Some of 'em. Couldn't pack everything that mattered." He nodded, slow, like he understood. "Those old houses don't forget, Bob. Sometimes they remember better than we do." That line stayed with me long after I left. I turned the radio on to drown it out, but wouldn't you know it, same static hum as last night. Same low tune under the noise, like someone humming behind the walls. I drove aimlessly for hours. Past the river road. Past the church, where we'd said our vows. Every turn seemed to bring me closer to her, not farther. At noon I stopped by the lake. The one where we used to fish on Sundays when money was tight but time was cheap. The water was still. A thin veil of fog drifted over it like breath. I sat on the hood of the truck, sipping cold coffee, trying to picture life without her shadow in it. Couldn't. I kept seeing her hair tied back, hands smudged with paint, telling me to hold the ladder steady. She always painted too high, too far. Said she liked reaching for things that didn't belong to her. I never understood that until she was gone. A gust came off the lake, bringing that same faint song I'd heard on the radio. A few notes, just enough to raise the hairs on my arms. It was her tune again. The watch ticked once more after being dead all night. I stared at it, heart thudding like a bad starter motor. "All right," I said quietly. Half to her, half to myself. "If you've got something to tell me, I'm listening." The lake stayed silent, but the ripples near the dock began to circle, slow, deliberate, like something beneath the surface had just turned over. By late afternoon, the fog had lifted. The sky broke open into that pale Ohio blue, the kind Mary used to call forgiving weather. I stayed by the lake longer than I meant to. Couldn't quite bring myself to leave the quiet. When I finally climbed back into the truck, I caught a glimpse of something tucked in the seat beside me. A folded napkin, old and creased, with faint handwriting smudged along the edge. It wasn't there before. I swear it wasn't. I turned it over carefully, my fingers trembling just enough to make the letters dance. It said, "Don't forget the porch swing." Mary's handwriting, no question. I'd know that looped G anywhere. My throat went dry. I looked around like a fool, half expecting her to be standing there with that half smile of hers. But there was no one, just the sound of wind pushing through cattails. I sat there, napkin in hand, until the engine's idle started to stutter. The note felt warm. I stepped out, boots crunching on wet gravel. My breath came out white, even though it wasn't cold enough for that. The boards on the steps moaned under my weight. Same as always. Inside the window, I could see the blue cup again. It had returned. And beside it, a small smear of paint on the wall, light green her color. That wall had been clean when I left. I walked closer, every step slower than the last. The hum of the radio inside started again, faint, tinny. It was playing the same tune, the one she'd hum while stirring soup, barefoot on the linoleum. I pressed my hand against the porch rail. It was warm. Not from the sun, but from something else, like the pulse of the house itself. "Mary," I whispered. The swing stopped. Everything went still. Even the rain seemed to hold its breath. Then a single drop fell from the roof, landing square on my watch. The second hand ticked once, sharp, clear, and the tune from inside the house faded into silence. A small voice in my head, hers maybe, said, "Don't leave it broken this time." I stepped up to the porch and laid the napkin on the swing. The fabric fluttered once, as if caught by a sigh. Then nothing. I backed away slowly, watching that old house in the fading light. Some things don't want to let you go. Others just need you to come back. One last time. And I couldn't shake the feeling that she'd been waiting for this exact moment, for me to finally listen. I didn't tell anyone about the napkin. Who'd believe me anyway? Old man loses. His wife starts seeing ghosts in handwriting. That's how folks talk in small towns. But the next morning I drove to the hardware store, picked up sandpaper, screws, and a fresh can of varnish. If Mary wanted that porch swing fixed, then that's what I'd do. The clerk, a kid no older than my grandson, asked, "You moving back in?" "Sir." I smiled, but it came out tired. "Just keeping a promise." He looked puzzled, but didn't ask. Back at the house, the air smelled of wet cedar and memory. The couple still wasn't home, so I figured I'd work quick, quiet, respectful. The boards of the swing were worn smooth from decades of use, the rope frayed but still strong. She used to sit there for hours reading her books, feet barely brushing the porch. I started sanding slow and steady, the way she liked things done. The sound filled the space where the radio used to hum. Each stroke brought back a summer, a laugh, a touch of her hand. After a while, I noticed something strange. The boards weren't just old, they were warm. Like the wood had been holding sunlight long after the clouds came. I paused, wiping sweat from my forehead, and heard a faint hum behind me. Turned around. The blue cup was gone again. A chill ran through me, even though the day was mild. I stepped inside the house. The floor still creaked where it always did. The kitchen smelled faintly of rain and paint thinner. There on the counter sat a small brush dipped in green paint, fresh wet, and a single stroke across the window framed the same color as our bedroom walls. I whispered her name again, barely more than breath. "Mary." The radio crackled to life, softer this time, like it was careful not to scare me. Then came her song, clearer than before. It wasn't just static, it was her voice humming like she always did when she wanted me to look up from whatever I was fixing. For a long moment I couldn't move. I just stood there, hand, trembling eyes, locked on that brush. Then I picked it up. The handle was dry, but the bristles were cold, wet with fresh paint. I looked down, and written across the inside of my wrist, faint but visible, was a green smudge. My breath caught. I hadn't touched the paint yet. Outside, the swing creaked once. Just once. Enough to remind me that this wasn't over. I stepped back onto the porch, set the brush down, and sat on the swing. It groaned under my weight, but held firm. The rain began again, light, rhythmic like applause from far away. I looked at the sky and said, "All right, Mary. You win. I'll keep it fixed." And for a heartbeat, maybe two, the swing lifted gently on its own, as if someone sat down beside me. I didn't turn my head. Didn't need to. I knew that warmth by heart. The watch ticked steady again, forgiving time 1 second at a time. I must have sat there an hour, maybe more. Didn't feel cold. Didn't feel tired. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like it's listening back. The rain let up around noon. Sunlight broke through the clouds, laying gold across the porch. The swing stopped moving, but the warmth beside me lingered faint as breath. I stood, brushed the sawdust off my jeans, and walked around to the backyard. The soil back there still held the shape of the garden she'd kept, rows of ghosts where tomatoes and beans once grew. She used to talk to her plants like friends. Said they needed conversation to stay alive. I used to tease her for it. Guess the joke's on me now. I knelt and ran my hand through the dirt. It was damp and dark, rich with the scent of rain. And right there, half buried beneath a clump of weeds, was something metal. I dug it out, her old trowel, rusted but familiar. The handle was cracked, initials carved in M+R. For a moment, the air thickened around me, the way it does before thunder. But instead of thunder, I heard it again, her hum. Soft, steady, coming from the kitchen window. That same tune. That same impossible calm. I stood, heart pounding, and looked toward the house. The curtains moved slightly, though there was no wind. Just a slow sway, like someone had brushed past them. I took a few steps closer. The kitchen light flicked on, faint through the glass. Then for a brief second I saw her. Not clear, more like the memory of a shape, standing at the counter, reaching for that blue cup. My throat tightened. The trowel slipped from my hand, landing in the dirt with a dull thud. By the time I blinked, she was gone. But the cup was there again, sitting by the window rim, shining wet like it had just been washed. I whispered, "You still keeping the place clean, huh?" And I swear, I heard the faintest chuckle through the static hum of the radio inside. I walked to the door but didn't open it. Didn't need to. The air between me and that threshold felt alive, charged like a wire about to spark. So I just stood there, holding my breath, letting the rain drip from the roof and the seconds fall from the watch. When I finally turned away, I looked at the trowel again. The rust had faded. The initials M+R looked freshly carved, almost new. I picked it up, wiped it clean on my sleeve, and said softly, "Guess we've got more to tend to, huh?" The clouds parted, a little light spilling across the porch swing. It creaked once like agreement, and I could almost hear her say it. "Don't let it die, Robert." "Not yet." I didn't answer. Didn't trust my voice. But as I walked back to the truck, I realized something had changed. The air didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt shared. Like maybe she wasn't stuck there after all. Maybe she was just waiting for me to come back and finish what we'd started. That evening I didn't leave town. Checked into a roadside motel, the kind where the ice machine rattles all night and the curtains never quite close. I laid there listening to trucks hum down Route 38 headlights, sweeping the ceiling like slow-moving ghosts. Sleep wouldn't come easy. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw the porch swing, rocking in the rain, her faint shape in the kitchen window. I wasn't scared. I was curious. Like maybe she'd been trying to say something all along and I'd been too proud or too broken to hear it. Around midnight, the radio on the nightstand clicked on by itself. Static at first, then a fragment of her song, warped and distant. My chest went tight. Same melody, same key she used to hum when she thought no one was listening. I whispered Mary. But the room stayed still, lit only by the flicker of the neon sign outside. The tune faded, leaving that soft hiss of empty air. I turned the knob until it clicked off. But even after the silence returned, the sound stayed in my head. The next morning I drove back to the house again. I told myself it was just to check the swing, make sure the varnish had set. But deep down I knew better. The couple's car was there this time. The young man was unloading boxes, his wife arranging potted plants along the porch rail. She smiled when she saw me. "Mr. Walker." "Right. We found some of your things in the shed. Thought you might want them." She handed me a small wooden box wrapped in a dish towel. I recognized the towel. It had little blue stripes, part of the set Mary bought the year we moved in. Inside the box were old nails, a pocket knife, and a folded photo. It was us, me and Mary, standing right there in front of the house, 40 years younger. Her hand was on my shoulder, paint streaked across her cheek. Behind us, that same porch swing. I looked up from the picture. The woman was watching me gently. "I hope you don't mind," she said. "We kept the radio. It still works." "Yeah," I said quietly. "It does that." As I turned to leave, the young man called out, "We heard something strange last night. Like humming. Thought maybe it was the wind." I almost smiled. "She used to do that. Helps the house sleep better." He laughed, unsure if I was joking. But the woman didn't laugh. She just looked past me toward the window, where the blue cup sat, sunlight glinting off its rim. For a moment, the air shifted soft, like someone sighing in relief. The radio inside began to play faintly again. Same tune, same slow rhythm that always filled our mornings. The young woman whispered, "It's beautiful." And I nodded. Yeah. She liked that one. As I walked back down the drive, my hand brushed the trowel hanging from my belt. I hadn't realized I'd brought it. Its weight felt right there against my hip, like a conversation left unfinished. The wind picked up, then carrying the smell of rain again, even though the sky was clear. And somewhere behind me, faint but certain, came the sound of the porch swing moving. Not lonely, not haunted, just alive. That night the rain came back. Not heavy, just that slow, thoughtful drizzle that sounds like memory. I pulled the truck off the road again. Same spot as before, where I could see the porch light glowing faint through the trees. It was strange sitting there in the dark, watching a house that no longer belonged to me. But it didn't feel wrong. It felt like standing outside a church after the sermon's over, quiet, sacred, familiar. I kept thinking about that photo the young couple gave me. Mary's smile in it wasn't wide or posed. It was small, almost private, like she knew something I didn't. Maybe she did. I set the photo on the dashboard, turned off the engine, and listened. The rain tapped the roof slow and steady, and underneath that faint as breath came her song again. No radio this time, just the world humming along. I closed my eyes and let it play. The melody carried me back to the first night we slept in that house. We had no furniture yet, just a mattress on the floor, and a lamp balanced on a crate. She'd fallen asleep mid-sentence, hand resting on my arm, the scent of fresh paint still thick in the air. Outside, the rain had sounded exactly like this, and somewhere in that rhythm I found the truth I'd been dodging. She never really left. She just changed addresses. The porch light flickered again, pulling me back to the present. Once. Twice. Then steady. I could almost hear her saying, "You still watching me, Bob?" I smiled at the thought, even chuckled. "Guess I am," I whispered. I reached for the watch on my wrist. It was ticking smooth again, steady as my heartbeat. When I'd first gotten it running years ago, she'd said, "That's you in there. Always fixing broken things." She wasn't wrong, but maybe this time it wasn't about fixing. Maybe it was about forgiving. A flash of lightning cracked far off, lighting up the sky. For an instant, I saw the reflection of the house on the wet road. The porch, the swing, and just for a second, two figures sitting there. One of them was me. The other, well, I didn't need to question who that was. When the light faded, the image was gone. But my heart stayed warm, steady, sure. The rain eased up around midnight. I leaned back, turned the radio knob, and caught the last few notes of that old tune before static took over. "Good night, Mary," I said softly. "Keep an eye on them for me." Somewhere inside the house, faint and distant, I thought I heard the swing creak one slow motion like a nod, then silence again. The kind of silence that isn't empty. The kind that's full of everything that ever mattered. I turned the key in the ignition, but didn't start the truck. The moment felt whole, finished, like a wound closing. Still, I stayed there a while longer. Listening, breathing, remembering. And just before I finally drove off, I could swear the porch light blinked once more like a wave goodbye. Morning came soft and gray, the kind that makes the whole town smell like wet earth and old wood. I drove toward the diner, the one Mary and I used to visit after church on Sundays. The coffee there hadn't changed too strong. A little burnt, served with a smile that tried too hard. But sitting in that same booth, I could almost feel her across from me, stirring sugar she never used, talking about nothing and everything. The waitress, a woman about my age, came by and said, "Haven't seen you around much, Bob. You moving away for good?" I hesitated. "I thought I was," I said. "But some places don't let you leave that easy." She chuckled, poured more coffee, and went back to the counter. I looked out the window. The rain had started again, light and patient. Every drop on the glass made the street shimmer like an old photograph. That's when I noticed a car pulling into the lot, the young couple's sedan. They walked in, laughing softly, holding hands. They didn't see me at first, so I just watched them for a bit. Something about the way they moved reminded me of us, before the gray, before the hospital, before the empty bed. They finally spotted me, waved, and came over. "Mr. Walker, the woman said we were just talking about you. We found something else in the attic, figured you'd want it." She slid a small tin across the table. It rattled softly, the way buttons do when you shake them. I opened it and stared. Inside were pieces of a wind chime, old brass little shells, a few wooden beads faded green. Mary made it our first spring in that house. It used to hang from the porch beam, catching the morning Sunday. We tried to hang it back up, the man said, but every time we did, it started ringing on its own, even when it wasn't windy. He smiled awkwardly, like he wasn't sure how that sounded. I didn't laugh. I just closed the tin gently and said, "Yeah." She always did like to announce herself. They left soon after, and I stayed a while, the tin still sitting in front of me. Every time the door opened and the wind moved, I swore I heard those same chimes. Soft, scattered, like they'd followed me here. When I finally stepped outside, the air smelled of wet leaves and sunlight, I held the tin up, shaking it lightly. The beads clinked together just once, and for a heartbeat, I could hear her voice through the sound, clear as day. "Don't let it rust, Bob." I closed my eyes, let the rain hit my face, and nodded. "All right," I said quietly. "One more thing to fix." The couple waved from their car before driving off. I stood there in the lot, watching their taillights fade into the fog, and as the wind picked up, I heard it again. That familiar, ringing, soft but certain, carrying across the road, like a promise still being kept. The house, the swing, the cup, the trowel, they all had something left to say. And maybe I wasn't done listening. That night I drove back one last time. Didn't tell myself why. Didn't need to. Some things don't fit in words, only in the quiet between heartbeats. The sky was clear for once. A sliver of moon hung above the roofline, pale and soft. Crickets filled the air, a steady chorus of life still happening. And there it was, the wind chime, hung back up on the porch beam, glinting faintly in the light. I hadn't done it. Neither had the young couple. They were gone for the weekend. Yet there, it was gently swaying, letting out that delicate, scattered tune. Each note carried like a memory that didn't want to die. I walked closer, gravel crunching beneath my boots. Every sound in that yard felt familiar, the creak of the gate, the groan of the steps, the way the air thickened near the door. When I reached the porch, I stopped. The swing was still. The radio inside whispered softly, a hum beneath the quiet. And there in the window again was the blue cup. But this time, it wasn't empty. Steam curled from it. Slow, visible, real. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob. It turned easily, like the house had been expecting me. The air inside was warm, carrying that scent I knew better than any fresh paint, rain, and coffee. "Mary," I said, my voice barely holding steady. The word felt too small for the room, but the radio answered just one clear note of that same melody, then silence. I walked through the kitchen, my boots leaving faint prints on the linoleum. The walls glowed soft, washed in the pale gold of the porch light. And then I saw it on the table next to the cup. A photograph. Not the one from the box. This one was new. It showed the porch swing freshly varnished with the wind chime above it exactly as it looked now. But in the photo, two figures sat there. One was me. The other, her. Same dress she wore the summer before she passed. Same smile that never quite belonged to this world. I sank into the nearest chair, heart pounding. The photo trembled in my hand. But instead of fear, all I felt was peace. Like something had been waiting years to finish speaking. "All right," I whispered. "I see it now." The house creaked softly in reply. Then the clock on the wall started ticking again, slow, rhythmic, alive. 7, 4, 2. Same as before. The minute hand trembled once, then clicked forward for the first time in 20 years. I looked at the watch on my wrist. Same movement. Same time. In sync. For a moment, everything in that house, the hum, the light, the air, felt perfectly still. Then the chimes outside rang once bright and clear, as if someone had just walked past them. I set the photo back down beside the cup. Didn't need to keep it. Didn't need proof. She was here. Not haunting. Not trapped. Just home. I stood in the doorway, hand resting on the frame. The air smelled of rain again. Always rain. "Good night, Mary," I said softly. And this time the reply came not from the radio or the wind, but from somewhere deep inside me. "Good night, Bob." The next morning broke gentle, gray-blue and clean. No thunder, no strange lights, no humming. Just the kind of quiet that feels earned. I made coffee in the motel room using the small tin percolator I'd carried for years. The sound of it bubbling brought back mornings with Mary, her sitting by the window, sunlight catching in her hair. I used to think that kind of peace was gone forever. Now I wasn't so sure. I poured a cup black, no sugar, and took it outside. The parking lot shimmered with dew. A stray dog wandered between cars, tail wagging slow like he knew me. He stopped near the truck, sniffed the tires, and looked up expectantly. I laughed under my breath. "You're early, pal." I didn't bring breakfast. He stayed by my side anyway. Something in his eyes, calm knowing, reminded me of her. I sat on the curb, the coffee warming my hands, and felt the kind of stillness that doesn't ask for explanation. That's when I noticed the folded napkin sticking out from under the driver's door. Same kind as before. Rain-stained edges curled. My heart started that old nervous rhythm. I unfolded it carefully. This time, the writing was faint, but clear enough. Plant the seeds. No signature. Didn't need one. I could hear her voice saying it, like she was standing right there. I looked over at the truck bed, where the trowel lay beside a small burlap sack, the same one from the shed I'd taken without thinking. I opened it. Inside were seeds, old and dry, but still whole. Labeled in her handwriting, tomatoes, marigolds, hope. I let out a shaky laugh. "Guess you're not done giving orders, huh?" The dog barked once, quick and bright, like he agreed. So I drove back. One last time. The yard behind the house looked softer in the morning light. The couple wasn't home again, and the air was sweet with wet grass. I knelt in that same patch of soil where I'd found the trowel before. The dirt gave easily beneath my hands, dark and alive. I planted the seeds slow, careful, pressing each one into the ground like a prayer. The dog lay nearby, tail sweeping the dirt. When I finished, I sat back, breath coming easy for the first time in years. A light drizzle began, faint and cool. It soaked into the soil, into my shirt, into everything. And I swear for a moment, I could smell her perfume, that mix of rainwater, paint, and lilacs. The wind chime above the porch stirred, gently ringing in soft time with the falling rain. No haunting this time. No static. Just music. I whispered, "They'll grow, Mary. I'll make sure of it." And the swing moved once, slow, approving. The dog trotted over, nudged my hand, and looked toward the road. He wanted to go. I nodded. "Yeah. I think I can now." When I climbed back into the truck, I didn't look back right away. Didn't need to. Because for the first time since she'd gone, the silence didn't ache. It felt like forgiveness. A week passed before I went back again. Long enough for the rain to settle, for the ground to breathe. The days stretched quiet, marked only by the ticking of the watch and the low hum of the road beneath my tires. I told myself I'd stop visiting, let the young couple make the place theirs. But something in me kept circling back, like a compass that refused to point anywhere else. When I turned onto the gravel drive, the first thing I noticed was color. Small green shoots pushing up through the soil where I'd planted the seeds. The marigolds came first, tiny bursts of orange and gold, and behind them, the dark stems of tomato plants, reaching toward the porch rail. I knelt beside them, running my fingers through the dirt. Warm. Alive. Not just memory anymore, something real. The door opened behind me. It was the young woman. She smiled when she saw me holding a cup of coffee. "Morning, Mr. Walker. We were hoping you'd come back." I stood, brushing off my knees. Didn't want to intrude. "You're not intruding," she said softly. "Honestly, it feels like you still belong here." Her husband stepped out next, holding the radio in his hands. He looked sheepish. It keeps playing that same tune, even when it's unplugged. You know anything about that? I smiled, slow and tired. Yeah, I think I do. He laughed nervously, set the radio on the porch rail and said, well, if it's a ghost, she's got good taste. The young woman looked out at the garden, eyes bright. She must have loved this place. She did, I said. Every inch of it. A breeze moved through then, just enough to set the chimes ringing. The sound was soft but sure, 3 notes that drifted through the air like a greeting. The woman looked up, startled, then smiled. Feels like she's still here. She is, I said, my voice catching just a little. She always will be. The man handed me the cup of coffee. Join us for a bit. We were about to sit on the swing. I hesitated, then nodded. The 3 of us sat there, side by side, the boards creaking beneath us. The swing rocked, gentle, steady. For a moment, the years folded in on themselves, and it felt like Mary was right there with us. The young man said, "You built this, didn't you?" Every nail, I said, with her watching, making sure I didn't cut corners. He chuckled. She sounds like my wife. Then you're lucky, I said quietly. Don't waste that. The rain began again, soft as breath. The woman set her coffee down, tilted her face toward the sky. Smells like paint, she said. I smiled. She's painting again. They looked at me curious, but I just kept my eyes on the horizon. The rain shimmered in the light, turning everything gold. And for the first time, in a long, long while, I didn't feel like a man who'd lost something. I felt like a man who'd been given something back. By midsummer, the garden had come alive. The marigolds burned bright against the porch, their scent sharp and clean. Tomato vines twisted up the old railings, heavy with fruit. Every time I stopped by, something new had bloomed, like the earth remembered her better than I ever could. The couple welcomed me each time, no questions asked. They'd started calling it Mary's garden. I didn't correct them. Couldn't. One afternoon, the woman said, "We found something else under the floorboards in the pantry." She handed me a small box wrapped in wax paper, tied with a piece of string. Inside was a letter, folded, yellowed, written in her hand. My breath caught. I sat on the porch steps, the swing moving gently beside me, and opened it. "Bob, if you ever find this, I want you to stop fixing everything. Some things aren't meant to be fixed. They're meant to be remembered. If I'm gone, don't stay angry at time. It only did what it's supposed to do. Promise me you'll let the house breathe again. Promise me you'll forgive yourself before you forgive me. M." I read it twice, then again. The words blurred, the ink bleeding into the paper as rain started to fall. The couple stepped back inside, leaving me there with the letter and the sound of the storm. I looked out over the yard. The wind moved through the flowers, carrying the scent of wet soil and coffee. The radio hummed faintly inside, then cut to static. And in that static, I heard her say it clear as the day she left. "You kept your promise." My hands shook, but not from fear. From relief. 40 years of guilt lifted in a breath. I leaned back against the post, let the rain soak through my shirt, and laughed softly. "Mary, you always did have the last word." The swing creaked, moving slow, rhythmic. I didn't look this time. Didn't need to. She was there. Not in the walls. Not in the static. In the rhythm of everything. Still living. The young man came back out, holding an umbrella. "Mr. Walker, you okay?" "Yeah," I said. "Better than I've been in a long while." He smiled. "You know, sometimes we hear humming at night. It's not scary. Just peaceful." I nodded. That's her way of tucking the house in. The rain softened to a whisper. The marigolds shimmered under the gray light. For a moment, I swore the petals looked like tiny flames, the kind that never burn out, only warm. I folded the letter back into its paper, slid it into my jacket. Didn't need to keep it, but I couldn't let it go yet. Some things belong close to the heart before they can belong to the past. As I stood to leave, I said quietly, "I forgive you, Mary." The wind answered, moving through the chimes, filling the air with music. And under it all, the watch on my wrist ticked steady, not counting the time lost anymore, but the time still left. Summer had slipped into early fall before I even noticed. The air changed first. The kind of crisp breath that tastes like rust and wood smoke. Then the light shifted softer gold at the edges, as if the sun itself had grown older and gentler. Every morning, a thin mist rose off the fields, and the house seemed to float in it, half in this world, half in memory. I still drove by from time to time, never knocked, never planned to stay. Just parked under the sycamores across the road, let the engine tick itself quiet, and watched. The garden was brighter than ever. Mary's marigolds had grown thick, spilling over the edge of the porch steps in a flood of orange. Tomato vines climbed the railings like they owned the place. The porch swing hung steady varnish, darkened by rain but still shining, and above it the wind chime never stopped singing, sometimes soft as breath, sometimes clear as laughter. I told myself I was just checking the varnish, making sure the ropes hadn't frayed, but that was a lie. Truth was, I missed the sound of that house breathing. You spend 40 years inside a set of walls, and even when you leave, the air still carries your name. One afternoon, the young woman waved me over from the porch. I hesitated, hand on the truck door, but she smiled the way Mary used to when she wanted me to stop being stubborn. So I walked up. The boards creaked beneath my boots, the same song they'd played all my life. She held out a small wicker basket filled with tomatoes and sprigs of thyme. "They're yours," she said. "You planted them." I started to say no, but she pressed the basket into my hands. Her nails were dirt-stained. She'd been weeding. "I like that. You're keeping them alive," I said. She shook her head. "I think they're keeping us alive." Her husband stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag. He was holding the old wall clock, the one that had stopped at 7:42, the morning Mary died. "Look at this," he said. "It started ticking again last week. I thought maybe you fixed it before you left." I hadn't touched it in 20 years. He set it on the porch rail. We stood there, all three of us, listening to the faint tick, steady as a heartbeat. It matched the watch on my wrist, second for second. Two small engines of time keeping rhythm like they'd been waiting for each other. A breeze moved through, carrying that smell I'd always known. Rain and old paint wood warmed by sunlight. Clouds gathered over the ridge, gray but gentle. "She always loved this kind of weather," I said. The young woman nodded. "She must have been something special." "She was," I said. "Still is." The first drops began to fall slow and spaced the way rain starts when it means to stay a while. They hit the tin roof with that soft drumming that used to pull us out of bed on lazy Sundays. I closed my eyes and listened. That sound had followed me through every season of my life. When I opened my eyes again, something caught the light near the porch steps, a small flash gold against the wet wood. I bent down and picked it up. A key, old and rust-specked, looped on a piece of string. The tag faded but legible read "Garage." My breath caught. I hadn't seen that key since the week Mary passed. I'd looked everywhere, inside drawers, behind the radio, under the truck seat. And now here, it was shining like it had been waiting for me. The young man tilted his head. "Funny, we never found a key for that door. It's been jammed shut since we moved in." I ran my thumb over the tag, felt the indentation of her handwriting burned into the brass. "Maybe it's time," I said quietly. We walked around back. The rain had thickened, soaking through my jacket, cool against the skin but not unpleasant. The garage door was warped from years of weather paint peeling off in long, curling strips. I slid the key into the lock. It fit without a fight. The latch gave with a sigh, the sound of a door, remembering how to open. Inside smelled like oil dust and the faint sweetness of old wood. Light poured in through cracks in the siding, slicing the air into gold ribbons. The workbench stood exactly where I'd left it. Jars of nails lined the shelf, coffee cans full of screws, a half-built birdhouse waiting for hands that never finished it. Spider webs glimmered in the corners like delicate blueprints. The young woman gasped softly. "It's like time stopped in here." "It did," I said. "For a while. Then I saw it hanging on the back wall wrapped in a thin sheet of plastic. A sign hand-painted in Mary's careful brushstrokes. Walker and Sons. Repair honest work, fair hands. The paint had faded to the color of dried leaves, but the letters still carried her touch. I reached out, peeled the plastic away, and the smell of turpentine and sun-baked pine filled the air. My throat tightened. "She made this for me," I said. "Our first year after we bought the house. Said it looked more official if the garage had a name." The young man smiled. "She had good instincts." "She had faith," I corrected. "In things she couldn't see yet." Thunder rolled in the distance, low and steady, like a drumbeat under the rain. Water began to leak through the roof, dripping onto the concrete in tiny silver pools. I didn't care. I set the sign on the bench, wiped the dust away until the letters gleamed again. Each stroke of paint felt like a heartbeat returning. The woman brushed her sleeve across her eyes. "It's beautiful," she whispered. I nodded, voice thick. She wanted it hung outside right above the porch. Said it made the house feel lived in. I never got around to it. Lightning flashed beyond the window, filling the room with a brief holy light. For that 1 second, everything glowed: the sign, the tools, the damp air swirling in the beams. And I swear I felt her standing behind me. Not ghostly, not cold, just there. That same calm presence that used to lean against the doorframe when I worked late. The thunder faded into a long sigh of rain. In that hush, I heard her voice, quiet as memory. "Told you not to sell your name short." I laughed through the ache in my chest. "Guess you were right again." The young man asked if I wanted to hang the sign. "Not yet," I said. "Let it breathe a while." He nodded, understanding more than my words. We stood there, 3 silhouettes in the dim gold light, the rain clapping gently on the roof above. After they left, I stayed behind. The garage smelled alive again. I traced the letters one last time, felt the groove of the brush where her hand once moved. Outside, the chimes sang faintly, carried through the crack in the door. I looked down at the key, still resting in my palm. For the first time, it felt light, forgiven. When I stepped back into the rain, the sky had turned that pale silver blue that only comes after a long storm. The house glowed through the mist, porch light burning steady. I walked to the truck shoes, sinking into the mud, and paused halfway down the drive. I turned. The wind lifted the sign inside the garage window, just enough for me to read it one last time: "Honest work, fair hands." The words shimmered in the light, and I could almost hear her saying it again, smiling through the years. "See, it still fits you." I smiled back at the rain. And for the first time, I believed her. By the time October settled in, the hills behind town had turned to gold and rust. The air smelled of damp wood and apple peel, that quiet perfume that only comes when the world is winding down for winter. Every road shimmered faintly under the rain, and every porch light glowed like a memory refusing to fade. I'd moved out of the motel by then. Rented a small cabin off County Line Road, 2 rooms, wood stove, and enough space for the dog and a workbench. Most nights I'd cook something simple, drink my coffee black, and listen to the clock tick against the hum of the rain. You can get used to silence if you treat it kindly. Still, every few days I'd drive past the old house. Not because I needed to, because it had become a habit, like checking that the world still turned the same way. I never went past without slowing down. Sometimes I'd see the young couple on the porch. She'd be reading, he'd be mending something with a hammer. Sometimes the porch was empty, just the swing moving slightly and the wind chime catching bits of light. But always, the blue cup sat by the kitchen window. The dog would perk up each time, tail tapping the seat. He'd press his nose against the glass like he expected someone to come out and greet him. Maybe he felt her too. Animals know the language of ghosts better than we do. One afternoon they invited me for supper. The invitation was written on plain paper, taped to my door when I came back from town. Mr. Walker, come by Saturday, 6 p.m. Mary's garden has enough to feed 3. I smiled when I read it. She'd have liked that her garden feeding strangers turned friends. Saturday came gray and soft. The drive smelled of rain-soaked leaves. When I turned into the lane, the house looked exactly like the day I'd built it, only newer, younger. Somehow, the porch light burned steady against the fog, and music drifted from inside, slow, warm, the kind of tune played when people mean to stay a while. Dinner was stew thick with tomatoes and herbs, the same ones we'd planted that morning with the napkin note. Bread baked fresh butter, melting into the cracks. We ate at the kitchen table, the 3 of us, while the clock ticked and the rain whispered on the roof. They told me stories about their plans, a nursery upstairs, repainting the guest room, hosting family for Christmas. I listened, smiling. It all sounded like life beginning again, and that was good. At one point, the young woman said, "Sometimes at night, the radio turns on by itself. It plays the same song every time. We don't mind, it's comforting." Her husband nodded. "Feels like the house is breathing along with us." I laughed softly. That's about right. She never could sleep through a quiet night. They asked questions about the house, the beams, the porch, the old garage. When I told them about the sign Walker and Sons Repair, the man said he'd hung it above the garage door. Felt wrong to keep it hidden, he said. I looked out through the rain-streaked window and saw it shining faintly in the porch light. Mary's lettering still holding its color. Honest work. Fair hands. It made my chest ache in the best way. After dinner they cleared the table while I stood by the window. The garden shimmered in the rain, marigolds bowed heavy with water. I could hear the chimes outside, slow and steady, their rhythm like breathing. The dog curled near the doortail, flicking in his sleep. The young woman poured us coffee and said, "We wanted to thank you. This house, it's not just walls, it feels alive, feels loved." I looked down at the cup in my hands, blue ceramic, chipped at the rim. She must have washed it carefully, kept it safe. "Keep it that way," I said quietly. "Houses remember kindness." For a while we just sat listening to the storm. It wasn't heavy, just a curtain of sound between the world and whatever comes next. The clock struck 8, its tone soft and full. The radio crackled once, then slipped into a hum. A few faint notes of that familiar tune drifted out, and I saw the couple glance at each other. They didn't seem afraid. They smiled. So did I. When I finally stood to go, the woman walked me to the door. The porch light reflected in her eyes, and for a second, I saw a glimmer of Mary there. The same steadiness, the same warmth. She hugged me quick and shy. "Thank you for trusting us with her home," she said. "It was never mine alone," I told her. "It belongs to anyone who listens." Outside, the rain had eased to a drizzle. The swing creaked lightly, as if moved by an unseen hand. I touched the railing. It was warm despite the chill. "Good night." I whispered to the house, to the porch, to the years. Walking to the truck felt like walking through a dream I didn't need to wake from. The dog hopped in, first settling on the seat. When I started the engine, the radio came alive before I could touch it. Static then, that same soft voice I'd been hearing for months. Mary's voice, calm, kind, carrying through the years. Like light through rain. "It's okay now, Bob." I smiled, hands steady on the wheel. "Yeah," I said aloud. "It finally is." I drove slow through town. Every light reflected in the puddles, turning the road into a river of gold and shadow. The wipers brushed in rhythm with the ticking watch. The dog pressed closer, sighing content. For once, I didn't feel the pull of what I'd lost. I felt the weight of what I'd kept. Halfway home, the clouds broke. A streak of pale moonlight fell across the windshield, and the rain turned silver. The road curved past the old church, the cemetery beyond the field, where the lake used to swell each spring. All of it quiet, familiar, forgiven. When I reached my cabin, I left the truck running for a moment just to hear the hum. The radio had gone silent again, but the air still carried her warmth. I stepped out, boots sinking slightly in the wet gravel, and looked back down the road. In the distance, barely visible through the mist, I could still see the porch light of the house. It blinked once, on again, like a heartbeat or a wave goodbye. Inside, I lit the stove and set the kettle to boil. The dog curled by the hearth tail, thumping once before settling. I took out the old watch, laid it on the table beside the folded letter and the garage key. All three, ticking quietly together. The past, the promise, and the present. Outside, the rain began again, gentle, forgiving. It tapped against the windows like a familiar friend, checking in. I leaned back in the chair, eyes closing, listening to it. Every drop carried a voice, every sound a memory turned kind. For a long while, I just breathed. And in that breathing, I felt her everywhere. The rhythm of the rain, the pulse of the clock, the quiet between each second. Not haunting me, not waiting for me, just loving me the way she always did without asking for anything back. When the kettle whistled, I poured 2 cups out of habit, steam rising into the soft yellow light. I set one across from me, let it sit untouched. Then I lifted mine and said, "To you, Mary, for building something that outlived both of us." The wind brushed past the cabin, and I could swear I heard the faintest echo of the porch chime 3 clear notes carried by the rain. That was answer enough. I took a sip, smiled at the empty chair, and let the night hold me. Time moved, but it no longer felt like it was leaving me behind. It felt like it was keeping me company. Outside, the rain kept singing, steady as forgiveness, soft as love that never learned how to end.